Sex Trafficking Monsters, the case of William D. Foster. Sex trafficking is the topic choice that I chose. Although I chose human trafficking, I just did a deeper topic expression on sex trafficking. Here is a brief synopsis on the different statistics, everything else around that is based around human trafficking. What is sex trafficking? Sex trafficking occurs when someone uses force, fraud, coercion to cause a commercial sex act with an adult, or causes a minor to commit a commercial sex act. A commercial sex act is an act includes prostitution, pornography, and a sexual performance done in exchange for any of items of value, such as money, drugs, shelter, or food, or clothes. The reason behind why I chose this topic is because this topic is one of those topics that's very important, but least not talked about. People are less informed about the dangers of sex trafficking. Sometimes people are not aware of how to spot sex trafficking, especially in hospitals or out in public. It lacks a lot of awareness, and sometimes it's not enough information surrounded about sex trafficking. I feel like there should be more information around it. The topic areas: African American and Latino youth are overrepresented in the child sex trafficking cases. According to the FBI, 52% of juveniles arrested for commercial sex acts are African American children. Over 91% of African American, over 91% of girls participating in the Los Angeles Star Court for child sex trafficking victims are African Americans and Latinos. Study constantly reports that 50 to 90% of child sex trafficking victims have been involved in the child welfare systems. In 2018, an estimate of 1 out of 7 endangered runaways reported to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children were likely child sex trafficking victims. The case background. Everyone wants to know about the case that I have chosen. Alrighty. So the person in the mugshot, this man's name is William D. Foster. In the early 2000s, Foster started his 15-year sex trafficking enterprise by targeting young teenage girls in foster care and impressionable young already abused girls. He also recruited girls from group homes, shelters, low-end strip clubs, and prostitutes working for violent pimps, promising them an escape from their troubled past or upbringing that would lead to a life of luxury, but instead he put them into exotic dancing and prostitution. He psychologically coerced and physically abused to keep victims in fear of what would happen to them if they tried to leave or tell law enforcement about his inner workings of his scheme. Despite promising these women he would invest their earnings into a fake clothing line called Bad Girls Fashion, so they could retire from this lifestyle in their 20s. He kept the money for himself, and he would live with up to 15 victims at a time. Even though they were based in Miami, he would send victims to several states, including New York, New Jersey, Michigan, and Nevada, for the sole purpose of selling sex. He also would force his victims to attend swinger parties and force them to have sex with Foster anytime he desired. Victims were forced into liquid diets, plastic surgeries to make them look like his standard attractiveness. In 2022, around March, Foster pled guilty to conspiracy to commit sex trafficking. In September, he was sentenced to 16 years in federal prison and ordered to pay over $14 million in restitution to his victims. The action plan. Well, action report, action plan, either or. Who were already sexually abused and trafficked, promising them a safe haven to escape their troubled situation, claiming the organization worked with the local police and the FBI. He would offer other things such as housing, therapy, medical assistance, and job training, but it made it seem like the nonprofit would change the victims for the better. So to continue the synopsis, in 2017, there were two victims identified as victim one and victim two. One of the victims told investigators that she was recruited by Foster in 2007 to be an exotic dancer and a prostitute, but escaped in 2010. The other victim stated that she worked with Foster since 2004, turning into one of the girls that handled the cash that other women brought in each night. She worked for Foster for 7 years, but when she had decided that she had enough, she tried to leave. Foster brutally assaulted her, pushing her onto a bed and punching her in her head. Foster also held his victim's social security card, birth certificates, watched their social media activity closely, read their emails, and tracked their search engines. None of them were allowed to have boyfriends or have a lifestyle outside of the sex trafficking ring. They feared sex trafficking for the fear of they might want to leave. In 2019, Hurricane Dorian ripped through Florida, forcing Foster to send 7 of the victims to Detroit, Michigan, forcing them to make at least $150K before they could return to Florida. During that time, there was one newly recruited victim who called the National Human Sex Trafficking Hotline, where the police met her in the Detroit area hotel, helping her gather her belongings. On September 6th, police raided the hotel, finding handwritten charts to track the woman's earnings and notes telling them how to make more money on their sexual encounters. FBI agents also found more evidence when they raided Foster's home in Florida. Among the things they discovered bins full of exotic dancing clothes, boxes including dozens of condoms, and later in the months of the year, Foster is arrested. Again, in 2022, Foster was pled guilty for conspiracy to commit sex trafficking. In September, Foster was sentenced to 60 years, and he also had to pay restitution to his victims. One major strength would be the human trafficking hotline. While one of the victims was in Detroit, one of the newly recruited victims called the hotline and had the police meet her at a hotel where the rest of the victims were staying, gathered up her belongings, and the hotel where the victims were staying was also raided. An area for improvement. So 2 years before the two women phoned the police in Michigan, 2 other victims of Foster's prostitution ring contacted investigators and gave detailed account of the inner workings of his scheme, but they did not act on it. If they did, investigators would have saved a lot of underage girls, taking down Foster's whole sex trafficking operation. On Foster's website, he falsely claimed that he was working with the police and the FBI, stating that it would have provided to sex trafficking victims. When Foster claimed those free services, normally investigators would fact check, but in this case, the investigators did not fact check. So it was a lot of failed leadership, as in like the police did not do what they were supposed to do to check to make sure that the website was actually working with the police. It failed public relations. Again, nobody checked, and a lot of people weren't paying attention, and it failed communication. And when the women called the first time, it didn't get to the investigators like it was supposed to. Recommendations. I think there needs to be more education on human trafficking. on how police officers can spot a sex trafficking ring. There needs to be oversight over websites, nonprofit organizations that claim to help human trafficking victims to ensure that they are helping the victims, not scamming them into doing the same sexual acts. So another recommendation is actually getting people more informed, having more classes, giving officers the tools to do those certain things, to keep an eye on those human trafficking things, and also giving people the more cyber stuff around to check the nonprofit organizations. In conclusion, human trafficking is everywhere, and it preys on the most vulnerable people, such as minors, who are put into foster group home care. These places are designed to help troubled youth safe and stay out of trouble. Most of the time, that isn't the case. They are often failed in giving the monsters or opportunists like fosters to influence and convince impressionable youth who are easily impressionable, leading them into a life of prostitution, drug abuse, and torture. Stories like this should be used to help identify future human trafficking rings and stop them before they grow. In other words, there needs to be more awareness, more things around the sex trafficking epidemic. And these are my sources that I chose. I hope everyone enjoyed my presentation.